Tell us about your campaign.
Sure. I'm Jenna Redel. I'm the Boone County Treasurer. I've been in office for about 2 years now. So I got elected in November of 22. And today I'm just excited to have the opportunity to talk with you folks about the nerdy stuff I do on a day-to-day basis. A lot of spreadsheets, a lot of math, a lot of money. And so I have I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the outline I put together. And we can get started talking about what I've been working on since coming into office. So can you all see this screen okay?
Yes, looks great.
Great. Okay. So I think the best place to start when talking about the Boone County Treasurer's Office is just to give people an idea of what the office actually does, right? Because the name makes people think it has something to do with money, something to do with math, but the day-to-day operations of the office, we really act as a bank for all of Boone County government and for about 15 other local agencies. They deposit their money with my office, and then we keep track of all the debits and credits going in and out of their account. We pay their bills, and then we always make sure that we've got enough cash in the bank at all times to cover their upcoming expenses. And anything that they're not likely to need in the next 30 to 60 days, we invest to help grow their principal, their account balances, and also to make sure that that money is protected. So like on your personal accounts, there's an FDI insurance limit on all of your balances that should the bank fail, your money is protected. The same thing operates with banks that I've put cash into, but because we're moving about $11 million through county accounts on a monthly basis, that FDIC limit for normal accounts doesn't provide us enough protection. So we have an agreement with the bank where they'll put securities to back up our cash deposits up to about $11 million. And anything above that, I need to put into my own securities and investments to make sure that that cash is protected. You'll see in a slide a little bit later on the total Boone County Treasury is about $213 million right now. And so that's a lot of funds that need to be invested. And since we're moving $11 million through our accounts on a monthly basis, some months we might only see $3 million move through the account. Other months we'll see 16 or 17 million move through. I need to be able to keep track of what's coming down the pipeline so that I can make sure that securities mature in time for us to have enough cash. Because if we buy a security but we have to sell it early, a lot of times changes in the market mean that we might actually lose money on that investment because we had to sell it in a market that wasn't optimal. So our core functions are we act as a bank, we manage cash flow for the county and these other agencies, and then anything that we're not going to need in the next 30 to 60 days gets invested. So when I came in January of 23, we had some bumps in the road. So I'm the first treasurer to come into office through an election. So initially come into office through an election since 1977. When Kay Murray was elected in 77 in a contested race, she was the last one. Everyone who's come in since then has come in initially through an appointment, either by the commission or the governor. And unfortunately, in that environment, we've also seen a lot of turnover in the office. I'm the 10th person to run the office in the last 15 years. So what typically would happen is someone would resign, or in the case of Nicole Galloway, right, she was elevated to the statewide auditor's level because she is excellent at her job, and she was excellent at running the auditor's office, but so she got moved up to a different league. And then after she left, commission appointed someone to serve as an interim, and then later the governor appointed someone else that they wanted to put into the office, and that person stayed until the next election. And then a lot of times in those situations, the next election might be uncontested. And so my election in November of 22 was the first time there was a contested race, and a candidate came in through that election. So that the race wasn't particularly contentious. I thought, that I didn't see any mudslinging. I thought everything was pretty cordial. But after my opponent lost the election, we just didn't have any contact after that, and there was no transition. So that when I came in, we were months behind in the basic work of the office. There were things that hadn't been done since the election happened. And then I didn't have any passwords for like our federal systems, or it took us a couple of months to just get back to a basic operating level. Also, when I came in, I told you $11 million moves through the account a month. Our primary bank account only had $3 million in it, and we were only slated to get 12 million more in cash for the rest of the year, because the timing on that big portfolio of investments had shifted them all out. So a majority of the money that we held wasn't going to turn back into cash for 5 years. I'll show you a slide later on that kind of shows you what the breakdown of that was. But that means that we weren't tying the timing of our investments to when we needed to have cash. And I don't think that was a new problem within the treasurer's office. I think that was a problem that had been happening for a long time. It appears that for the most part, when we had more cash than we were going to use in the next couple of months, we were regularly just putting it into investments that were timed to be out as far as we could get them, which is by state law, we can only invest out 5 years. So almost everything that was getting invested on this long 5-year timeline. So we had a low balance, we had a flunky bad transition. Our investments hadn't been tied to when we were going to need cash. And then we had some like true compliance issues. We were 4 years behind in filing mandatory disclosures that the county issues debt sometimes. Like when we built the 911 center, we issued bonds to pay for that up front, and then we pay back money on those bonds every year. But the people who buy municipal county bonds, they want disclosure and transparency so that they can see how we're doing, right? They want to see how healthy the organization is to know whether or not they should be worried about their investment. And so every year we have to file financial disclosures that show how we're doing. And we hadn't done that for 4 years. Now we are going to issue new debt in the next probably 18 months for that training center. And the problem with not filing our mandatory disclosures is that will ding us when we go to issue new debt. So it will be more expensive for us to issue new debt if we have these sort of black marks on our record. So we had mandatory disclosures that weren't filed. We were also out of compliance with our investment policy. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. But that investment policy was also, I think, 12 years old when I came to office and hadn't been updated in quite a long time. And then an additional issue that needed to get resolved pretty quickly was our policies said that we could only buy investments from approved brokers on the approved broker list, but there was no approved broker list. I couldn't find one anywhere. I couldn't find what our processes were to get somebody approved. And so fortunately, we had a bank contract in place that our bank, we're currently using Central Bank, also holds our securities for us. And so I could use that bank contract to, have a negotiated rate for buying. I buy very vanilla investments. They're mostly treasury bonds. And so those, there's a known price for those. And I could sort of keep track of the cost for us of using our bank to broker those purchases for us. And they've done a very nice job with us on that. But so had to use the approved brokers list that did not exist. And I could not figure out how to add people to it. And then the last thing was, and this one was sort of a more nuanced, and it took a while to see what was happening, but we had no oversight in the investment purchase process. So there is a lot of oversight about once an investment matures and money comes in. All of that is well accounted for. We get that down to the penny pretty much every month, that all the cash that's coming in gets recorded. We split it up evenly amongst all the different agencies who have money with the county. But the process of who am I buying these investments from? How much am I paying for them? What kind of rate of return am I getting? Is this somebody's brother-in-law? Do I always use the guy who also, cuts me a deal on golf or whatever it is that people do in their free time? Those sorts of things, we just weren't, no one knew that detail except the treasurer. And there was no one within our organization that had an ability to see it or would be in a position that they could force me to disclose that information. So that's the messiness at the beginning. But we'll talk about some new systems that we've put in place that I think resolve a lot of this. So this is the first slide, talking about the timing of the holdings that we had in the portfolio when we came in. So this is what our scheduled maturities looked like on day one when I came into office. So my first year, 23, the whole year, $12 million of the 213 turned back into cash. Everything else that we did to get through that first year came from monthly sales tax deposits from one of our agencies that we hold money for. Boone County Fire Department issued an $8 million bond that they said we had a big cash influx from. Those kind of things I pieced together throughout the year to cover our expenses, but it wasn't our maturities that were able to cover it. So then you can see in 2024, we had a little bit more cash, but it's still the bulk of the maturities were scheduled for 25 and 26. A complicated thing about this is ARPA funds, right? The county received $34 million in ARPA funding in the summers of 21 and 22. Right? That money, for the most part, got invested in things that will mature in 26 and 27, right? Because that's 5 years out from when the money came in. But the deadline for spending ARPA funds is the end of 26. And we started spending ARPA funds. We've spent, I think we're up to $11 million in ARPA spending this year. So it is just a cash flow challenge, right? All this money is coming back, right? It's all turning back into cash. We'll manage it, but in the meantime, some of this is also why we are likely to issue bonds later on this year, early next year, for the training center, because we're not going to have enough cash to run operations and also have additional cash flow to pay for $15 million training center. So how do we get a solution to that? So the way to do that better is to develop a cash flow forecast. It's a big, ugly spreadsheet. This one is that you have up on the screen is an example, because you don't want to see mine, because it's got like 15 colors in it, and you got to scroll up and down each way. But how I developed this is just basic research. It was going through our clunky computer system and looking month by month for the last 10 years. What do we spend in January? What do we spend in February? What income came in those same months? And at this point, so the first round of this was doing that on a system level, right? What is coming in and out of the bank on average every month? And now with more time in it, I can do that same thing on an office level, right? I can tell you what, when in the year does road and bridge tend to have big expenses. And now, right, I also know what those tend to be. We buy a lot of gravel and we buy a lot of dump trucks. And those usually happen in July and October. And so that now, as I'm looking at the timing of these investments, right, when do we want them to mature? Well, I want them to mature, 3 weeks before dump truck season and, 3 weeks before gravel season, because that's when we need the money. And it doesn't matter if something gives me a better rate if it matures 2 months later, because that's not when I need the money. And I'm going to end up having to sell that thing early, and I can't predict what the market's going to be like at that time and who's going to be interested in buying my scratch and dent bond that I need cash for in order to buy the gravel. So we do cash flow forecasting, and I honestly like that work. I like making the numbers balance in a spreadsheet. I like looking for trends over time. It is I'm not fun at dinner parties talking about it, but it is, right? It's really useful information, and it knowing that also helps us earn more money, right? It helps us better time things, and it also helps lower the stress around the office, because we know what's coming down the pipeline, and we've got our ducks in a row when those bills come in, so that we have things time to hit when we need. So cash flow forecasting also involves a lot of phone time. I've worked for the county for 12 years, right? I was the risk management and HR director before I was the treasurer. And so I know all of the folks in the office. I know what those folks do. I know what their job entails. I know who pays the bills in the office, and I know who knows what the real answer is about, when we're going to pay the invoice on those dump trucks. And so I call those folks and tell them like, hey, what do you guys have any big expenses coming up? And I've done that often enough that now they email me when something new is hitting, or they start to hear scuttlebutt about like, oh, they're, they're thinking about renovating something or whatever. They'll give me a heads up early because they know why I'm asking. It's not because I want to influence any of those decisions. It's that if you want the cash available, you gotta fold me into the conversation, because otherwise you might get a bill that I don't have enough cash to pay. So then you can't pay that bill until we work through it. So then the other thing that I think is a solution to this problem is transparency and accountability. Before we started making some changes, there were times that the treasurer's office was selling investments short, right? Selling them before their maturity. But nobody knew outside of the office, because that level of detail, right? It's day-to-day operational stuff in the treasurer's office. I don't need anyone's outside approval to make those sales. And so I wouldn't have to tell anybody about it if I had, done a poor job of cash forecasting. And now I am taking a 10, 20, 30, 40, $100,000 loss on an investment because we weren't tracking the money until the investments matured, right? So we need more transparency and accountability, because somebody should know if I'm doing a poor job in those areas. So, okay, now we'll talk a little bit about how we improve that transparency and accountability, but now we're going to talk about problems again. So, the mandatory disclosures we talked about, those were pretty easy to solve. It was just a matter of figuring out that they hadn't been filed, right? They weren't on a calendar in the office. They're due July 1. They weren't on our collective calendar. They're on there now. And there's multiple people have warnings that say, hey, this thing's coming up in a couple of weeks. But once we knew about it, it took maybe a week or two to get all the paperwork together and get those things filed. We did it within a couple of months of me coming into office. And so even now, as we're in this discussion period with our bond counsel about issuing this new debt for the training center, they know that we were out of compliance for a while, and they've advised it's far enough in the past that they don't think it's
Sorry
going
about that.
being our credit when we go to issue these new bonds. So then we also had thousands of dollars in tax penalties when I first came into office, because in that period of time between the election and then when I took office, we also we filed our payroll taxes late. And so the IRS does not like it when you don't give them money on time. And so they started charging us a really high interest rate for them loaning us their money for the period of time until we got it filed. And so we have put in systems to help deal with that problem, but we got a big bill from the IRS, and then the clerk, Brianna Lennon, and I spent months going back and forth with the IRS, pleading our case about why the taxpayers of Boone County shouldn't be penalized for this untimely filing of our taxes. And ultimately we persuaded them, mostly based on the fact that this was an aberration, right? We pay our bills on time, especially to the IRS. And they gave us the benefit of the doubt, along with a very sternly worded letter that said, we get one benefit of the doubt, and we have now used that up. So we should be prepared to pay any penalties that arise in the future. But then, so compliance issues, those mandatory disclosures, paying our taxes on time. We also were out of compliance with the county's investment policy. I mentioned before, the investment policy was out of date. It was written by Nicole Galloway. It's a very good policy, but it had not been updated in 12 years. And then it appears at some point, we also stopped following it, at least with regard to our investments. And then I mentioned before, the investment policy is also where that requirement of using the broker list comes from. And again, the broker list didn't exist. So this is the data about the compliance issue with our investments. So the investment policy requires limits on different types of investments that we can use. It says if you just want to buy US Treasury bonds, you can have all of your investments in that. They are the safest, most vanilla variety of investments. Feel free to put all your money in that. It says we could also keep it all in cash because cash is very safe. It has, it has a value, but it limits the percentage of our portfolio that can be agency bonds to 60%. And then further limits the amount of callable bonds that we can have. And a callable bond just means that when you buy a bond, you agree to how long the bond is going to be for, right? It might be a $1 million 1-year bond that gives you 5% interest, right? So you agree on the amount of the purchase price. You pay that at the beginning and you get it back at the end, but you get it at some future date. So you agree on the amount, you agree on the date, and you agree on the interest rate. A callable bond says, okay, well, this is $1 million bond and it's for 5 years. But if the interest rate changes too much in those 5 years, we can pay it off early. And if they pay it off early, then they don't owe you the interest payments that were due over those 5 years, right? If they pay it off after 1 year, you don't get the benefit of the next 4 years as interest payments. You just get your cash back early. So we are limited to 30% of our portfolio being callable bonds because they make it more unpredictable, right? What your cash flow is going to be like. It also means that a benefit to buying a 5-year bond is you think, okay, well, this is a good deal, right? There were bonds recently that were being issued for like 5%. That's higher than average. And so you would want to lock in a 5% bond for 5 years because, right, it's a good rate. But if it was a callable bond, if the market lowered that now new bonds were issuing for 4% or 3%, they could pay it off early and then you'd have your cash back, but the market would only be offering 3 or 4% bonds, right? And you used to have a 5, but now the only thing you can buy new is a 3 or 4% bond. So that's the other reason they don't want us to have a lot of callable bonds. But when I took the portfolio over, the limit on agency bonds was 60%. We were at almost 80%. And then we were only supposed to have 30% callable, but almost 70% of our whole portfolio was callable bonds. So in this graphic, right, this whole blue section, that is agency bonds, with most of those being callable. So the remedy for that is really gonna take some time to go back to diversifying the portfolio. If I had sold off everything that was out of compliance and bought new stuff with it, the county would have experienced about an $8 million loss in a single day because the market had changed enough that, right, if we hold those bonds, we're going to get our money back at the end of the term. But if I have to sell them early, people aren't gonna wanna pay full price for those bonds because some of them, the percentage that was locked in on them is lower than was currently being offered in the market. So I might have maybe something paying 2%, but new bonds were issuing at 5%. So if I had to sell it, I would have to take that 3% difference as a loss in the cash price of the bond. So I'm not, I don't think that is I don't think the solution is to sell those. They're still, stable. They're like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae debt issued by the federal government. They're unlikely to default. I think they're still a stable product. We are going to continue to hold those until they mature. But as we're buying new products, we are going to continue to buy things that will get us out of compliance with our policy. And the limits on the investment policy, that comes from recommendations from the state treasurer, right? The state treasurer says, it's a best practice to not have more than 60% agency bonds. It's a best practice to not have more than 30% of your bonds callable. And so we didn't arbitrarily set those limits. They're sort of industry standard limits, and we'll get back to being in compliance with that policy. But I think it's going to take us probably about 2 more years, because as you saw, we've got this big bump of investments that are all going to mature in 25 and 26. A lot of those are those callable agency bonds that I also need to limit down the line. Okay, so some of the other solutions are we updated the investment policy, and in updating it, I did 2 main things. I added an ethics element to our investment policy so that we have spelled out some ethics things like and no one on my staff can take contributions from anyone who's going to sell an investment product to us. We can't do business with anyone that is a relation to anyone in the office, or we would have a financial gain from directing business to. In addition to some basic ethics requirements, I also added to the policy some mandated sharing of information with people who are in a position to, number one, care about the information, but 2, do something about it if there is a problem. And so I issue a report to the Boone County Commission and to some of those stakeholders that I talked about, those other agencies we hold funds for, on a quarterly basis. And it doesn't just say report information to these people. It specifies you have to identify the composition of the investment portfolio, like what are you holding, when does it mature, what type of an investment is it. I have to report all of the purchases that I've made in the prior quarter. Let's see, I can show you what the report looks like. So here is the most recent one. This is distributed to the Boone County Commission and some other interested folks. You'll see, I like graphs a whole lot. I think, sometimes we talk about transparency and disclosure, but that ends up being just a data dump of, especially with the stuff I work in, right? A lot of spreadsheets. If I just turned over a bunch of raw data spreadsheets, it would have almost no effective disclosure in it, because it would be giving somebody hours of work to comb through that and try to figure out what our terminology means for different things, how we track different data, especially with financial reporting. There's a lot of really technical terms that are used to identify what numbers are included in a spreadsheet and what numbers aren't included in that spreadsheet. And so I tried to just make things as simple as possible using plain language. I try to be really clear in the definitions about what all is included in the numbers that I'm sharing with the commission and others. And so this report is designed to be for people who, right, they might spend an hour or two maybe reviewing this data, but it is not their full-time job. I will give them the supporting documentation that has all those deep dive spreadsheets. If they want to look through those, they are welcome to. And certainly if there's ever anything that needs to be investigated, they need to know that deep dive data is available. But on a day-to-day basis, when what I'm asking them to do is just to help keep an eye out for problems, I would much prefer to look at data in these kind of formats where there's some basic graphic information or basic data with clear definitions, and then also a colorful graph or two to help clarify what's in there. And so some of the things that we have gone over, those graphs come directly from the report that I'm giving commission. So we had that one with the big blue section, sort of went out to here, the agency and callable bonds. This is that same data, but with June 2024 information. So we've gotten the agency bonds down to 65% from 80. We're down to 65. The callable agency bonds were up at 70%. We've got them down to 54. It's an ongoing project that'll take us a while, but I'm providing status reports, right? Hey, this was a problem. We're working on it. This is where we were. This is where we are today. The other thing that I have to report out to them is the days. What's the average duration of the investments that I bought? The term of art in the industry is average days to maturity. That's what this graphic outlines for them. When I came in, most of the holdings had an average maturity of over 1,000 days. Currently, that number is about half that. It's 560 days. And part of that is because we're not putting everything out to 5 years, but also I needed to hang on to every dollar that came in to the Treasury for the last couple of years, just to make sure that we could pay the bills. And even though I needed to hold on to that cash, I didn't need it in the bank every single day. So I did a lot of shorter term investments. So we might invest $5 million in a product that's going to mature in 2 weeks. But if I know I'm not going to need that 5 million for the next 2 weeks, why not let it grow more interest for the county by putting it into a really secure investment? So then that regular report to commission. I think there's another slide to show you something else, but can you guys still see this? Okay, if I leave it in this format, because I'm going to flip between a couple of other outside things.
Looks
here.
okay to me.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So then another problem that we had in the portfolio or in the treasurer's office was there wasn't any oversight on those investment purchases. I put this slide in just to show you Right, I consider that a big problem because we have a lot of money in the treasury, and most of it is in investments, right? The cash value of the treasury was about $223 million in June when this graph came from. Most of that is in investments. Just me doing some data analysis, I know I've purchased more than $140 million in investments in the 2 years that I've been in the office. And every time I make a purchase, somebody makes commission on that sale. And so that's why I had concern that we weren't disclosing that to anyone, and no one but me had access to the information that would show us whether or not we had a problem. So the solution for me on that issue was, again, transparency and accountability. And I created an investment review committee that's staffed by people who have a professional obligation to report if I am committing crimes or mismanaging county funds. So two of the people on that committee are the sheriff. He would be who was tasked with investigating me if I were accused of a crime. I want him to be very familiar with the work I do, the reports that are available to me, what my data set looks like, and how to tell whether or not there's a problem. And then the county attorney, CJ Dykehouse, is another person who is on the investment review committee. His, the Missouri Bar has a code of professional conduct that identifies what his obligations are to his clients. His client is Boone County government, right? He's the county attorney. He's not my personal attorney. He's not the treasurer's attorney. In a conflict between me and county government, CJ has to be on the side of county government, and he has professional obligations that would require him to report on me if I were doing something wrong. And those are the people who I want as the watchdogs on this, because $213 million is a lot of money, and money can have a corrupting influence if there's no good oversight. So I created this investment review board. Every time I purchase an investment, I have to provide them with the details about those transactions, sort of the receipts for those purchases, on the same day that the purchase happens. And so that looks like, so these are the receipts that we get from, this one came from Central Bank. This is for the purchase of a $2 million treasury bond that will mature on October 31st of 24. And so I give them these receipts, but then the thing that we're looking at right now is a guide that I made for them early on to say, okay, I don't expect you to just know automatically what to do with this. It's called a trade ticket. So let's go through and I identify, okay, well, these are explanations for what each of these fields mean. And I don't send them this on every trade ticket, right? I send them the trade ticket now, but this is sort of the template guide to remind them when they're reviewing them in the future, what is all this stuff? You know, what is this thing versus that thing? And what on here is, you know, where should I be directing my attention? And then they also get emails from me every time I make a purchase. And so this is an actual email that I sent to the sheriff and the county counselor when I made a purchase. And so it gives them some details, right, about uh, what, what's included in their packet. But then also in this section right here, this is sort of a summary of one of these trade tickets, just like a quick snapshot of, right, this was the purchase price. This is what we're going to get back in cash. This is how much money we're going to make on this investment if it's held to maturity. Because again, all of these folks have full-time jobs that don't have anything to do with the treasurer's office, but I want them to help me protect this area of county government. And so I have an obligation to make that work a little easier for them by providing them summary data, also with the supporting documentation and helping to teach them how to use these tools and what to look for. So, then you saw the reports for commission and other stakeholders. We are also about to go live. It's going to happen probably next week with a section on the Boone County Treasurer's website that will report all investment purchases. It's not the most visually appealing thing I've ever made in my life, but it is, I'm trying to make it so that it will always look the same. So that if people are interested, I think there may be like 4 or 5 people in the whole world who are be interested in this information, but when they look at it, right, this is my attempt to be as simple and transparent as possible. So first column is, when did I purchase it? Second column is, when is it going to mature? How many days are in between that? The CUSIP number is just it's sort of like a serial number for an issuance by, it's usually the federal government. All of the treasuries in this batch that were that are going to mature on April 4th of 2024 that have this specific rate, they all use this same number. So if anyone wanted to double check that this was a real investment, they could look this number up and find some details about it. This next column is just what type of investment is it? Is it a treasury bond? Is it a repurchase order? This column is, how much did the county actually pay for the investment? This is how much we're going to get in cash on the day that it matures. If the security was a type that paid, some of them pay interest payments twice a year. Those interest payments would be outlined in this column. J is just a summary of, right, the difference between purchase price and maturity price plus any interest payments. That's going to be what that total earnings is. Then K is what percentage is that as a earnings percentage. And then the last column is, who did I buy it from? And as I told you before, just about everything I have right now is going to say central bank on it, because we've got that bank contract in place. And we have developed a new process for how to vet brokers, but it's still sort of in beta testing stage. And so until it's completely cleared all the hurdles, I'm going to continue to stick with our bank contract and buy these vanilla securities. So and then back over there. And what I'm working toward in that broker process is I would like us to be in a system where it isn't just that we have an approved list of people that we can buy stuff from. I am trying to get us to a system where when we have cash that we need to invest, we send that to 3 or 4 brokers and say, hey, we've got $3 million that we need to invest that matures in April of 26. What would you recommend that we purchase with that? And so that it becomes a competitive process for who's going to give us the best deal, right? Who can find the best product. And so then when that system is up and running, right, that's how I expect it to work. Is we'll have folks that we went through, and right, we've run them through. FINRA is an organization that sort of is anyone who has a complaint about a broker, that's where it's going to go to. We're going to run our brokers through FINRA to make sure that they're above board. They don't have any, ethics violations or client money issues or whatever. We're going to make sure that they've got, they have their license in the state of Missouri, and they have financial backing of at least a certain amount. And then we are going to encourage them to offer us the best deal that they can by knowing that somebody else might give us a better deal and they won't get our business. So then I'll talk to you about the investment review committee. I provide them those emails. I try to train them on how to be good watchdogs. They get all the trade tickets. But more than that, I am also trying to develop a culture, right, where there is an expectation that I provide information. There is a knowledge about what I do and what my reporting looks like, and what can people expect? It's hard, right, from the outside to oversee something when you don't even know what's possible, right? If I was trying to be deceptive, I would say, okay, well, we don't have a report that would show you that, or how can I possibly know this or that data? I want to show them what's possible so that they can continue to hold this office accountable. And right, I don't have anything to hide, which is a perfect situation to be in when you're trying to figure out, what kind of oversight is appropriate. And so both with commission and with the investment review committee, and soon with the website, it's just, I'm trying to create an expectation so that even if, right, I'm up for re-election in November, and who knows how the world is going to go, but even not in the office, these should still be expectations. This is still information that is possible to share, and certainly I feel like needs to be shared, because it is right, there's too much potential for things to go bad. And so yeah, goodness sakes, I talked a lot longer than I expected to, but I also have to tell you, I'm just so excited that anyone showed up to this meeting and cares what the treasurer's office is doing and has any interest in it, because right, it's complicated. It hasn't been a topic that's been talked about a lot in the past, but my goodness, right, $223 million, like it is that those public funds are vitally important to our community, and right, and we all, I think, care about protecting them. Also, I've been at the state treasurers conference all week. I am one of 8 Dems in all of state treasurers. I'm just excited to see other faces of people who care about things that I care about. So glad to see all of y'all. I appreciate you all coming, and thank you very much for caring about my nerdy spreadsheet stuff. So
Jenna, thanks a lot. I learned an awful lot, and I got a couple of comments, but first I want to ask a couple of questions. Are not reporting and oversight required in state and county government? And then secondly, how do you take all this complicated stuff and put it into a campaign and convey that to the undecided / unknowledgeable voter that's going to vote on election day?
so I will take the second question first because I definitely heard it better. But it is, Sarah knows as well. I am a big wonky nerd. And so if given too much time, I will go into way too much detail about a whole lot of stuff. So how do I turn that into campaign stuff? I mean, really it is just, I tend to only talk about the investment review committee because I feel like that's a discrete thing that people understand, like, oh, wait, nobody knew who you were buying stuff from or how much it cost or who you were buying it from. That feels easier for people to sort of recognize that there is something not right with that. And then just the systems that we're putting in place to make that system better. And right, that not very many folks know CJ Dykehouse, the county councilor. He's great, but lots of folks know Sheriff Carey, right? And he is, you know, he's somebody that I trust to, you know, hold me accountable if there's a problem. And so, yeah, I try to limit it to those things. I do not show them my graphs and spreadsheets and those sorts of things.
Herb, you have a question?
I have a comment. Wow,
Sorry.
I am
No.
impressed. I wish to confer upon you an award that does not exist. The Ivy Baker Priest Award, named for a friend of mine. You may recognize the name. A friend of the family, whom I talked to many times when I was growing up, and learned something about what she was doing as Treasurer of the United States from 1953 to 61, who cleaned up a lot of messes she inherited, but it took her 8 years to do it. Not as much as you have done in 2. Thank you very much.
That's very nice of you to say. That's a high compliment.
And I'm also going to say, in the 50 years, I've never understood the treasurer's job. The 50 plus years that we've lived around here. And you did a great job.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Making it understandable. And we need to be making as much money as we can from the money that we have if we're going to be good stewards for the public. Who is your opponent?
Yeah, and it is right that the work of the treasurer's office is a lot like the work we all do in our own homes, right? It is you put a budget together, you know when the bills are coming and when the income's coming. It is just it's managing a checking account that also has like 150 people that all have the ability to write checks and not tell you when they're going to get paid.
Who is your opponent?
It's the same one as last time, with Dustin Stanton.
The Eggman. The Eggman.
Yeah, and he was appointed by Governor Parson into the office between April and December of 2022. So he was in the office before I won the election.
Yep.
And he laid an egg.
Herb didn't signing all those dollar bills cut into a lot of her time?
Well,
So
that's
then
the
I guess-
U.S. Treasurer and the county are not the same, but the same title.
So then I want to go back to my other question. Aren't reporting and oversight required by county government?
Yeah, so especially the county's auditor's office, right? They do a lot of reporting. So a little bit that's what I would try to explain early on is when cash comes in, it is really tracked well and in detail. It just is this gap where the auditor's office could determine when I did an expenditure for an investment, right? They would know what the purchase price was for it, but they had no way of knowing, well, what was the maturity price for it, right? Like, did she spend this $1.2 million on an investment that when it matures is only going to be $1 million, or is it going to be $3 million? There just was no mechanism for reporting those things. And apparently it isn't mandated, right? Because we've never had a bad audit come through about failing to disclose this stuff. It was just, I think it's just not, most county governments don't invest at the level that we do, the volume that we do, but it is, yeah, it's an area that I feel like should have regulation over it, but it just currently doesn't. So hopefully we can fill that gap.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, I'll just make a couple of comments. One is that it's really too bad that we don't have a newspaper of the quality of the Tribune of 10 years ago, because this is the first I heard of your story, and that should have been widely told. There should have been a scandal that was all over the Tribune or Missourian back when that occurred. And secondly, just as a political comment, since Republicans have become the party of anti-government, the chances are that even if a Republican administrative office seeker cares about the job and is honest, it's very likely the Democrat will be far more competent, far more qualified. And I wish we could find a way to convey that to everybody out there when they're voting for, especially, I mean, people will have differences in their politics and who they want to vote for Congress and legislature, but especially in an administrative position. It is so important to vote for competency. So again, thank you very much for being here.
I had a question. Are you able to invest in sustainable investments?
Yeah, so there's a state state
Yeah, I
statute
know.
identifies what we can invest in, and it is pretty limited, right? It is US treasuries, it's agency bonds, it's we can buy some like short-term corporate loans, and I think of everything, that's the area that, right, if your focus is also sort of ethical standards for the things that you invest in, that area of corporate investment is probably where there's the most overlap. But we can't buy investments in like renewable energy or there just isn't a mechanism for those. But right, we could avoid doing business with, you know, any of those like corporate investments that were in, I don't know, like with like BlackRock or big tobacco or any of those kind of things.
Okay.
And so far, honestly, I'm primarily buying US securities because they're performing really well and they're like the most stable and safe investment product.
Okay. Thank you again, Jenna.
Great. Thanks, Greg.
Appreciate it. To start our regular meeting, I have something to talk about in terms of